So this is Avowed, the new and fancy role-playing game from veteran RPG studio Obsidian, well known for Neverwinter Nights, Fallout New Vegas and the Pillars of Eternity games. Hey, I enjoyed Pentiment a whole lot. They're so proud of their work that they even have a Marvel-style opening showing off all their past releases. Now, this game was already buried in controversy before it even released, most of it about it being woke. And while I do think the modern zeitgeist and certain contemporary ideas have been detrimental to storytelling across the different mediums, and while I also have no love for the more prominent consulting agencies that are meddling with perfectly fine games, I think we have reached a point where some of the issues are blown out of proportions. Some of the, let's call them anti-woke critics and commentators for the sake of argument, can't see anything positive in a game that just ever so slightly came into contact with the themes and ideas that are also shared by the woke crowd. The pendulum has swung too far to the other side when it comes to them. Everything has to be trash, everything has to be corrupted because there might be a gay character in a game or a fat chick. What started with wanting to preserve femininity in female characters and pointing out the uglification of them in Western games, and yeah, this does certainly occur, morphed into hating on every woman in a game that isn't absolutely beautiful. Now every female character is compared to Eve from Stellar Blade. Now they criticize that the plain village girl in the new Witcher trailer isn't sexy enough, and why can't she have her tits out so that we would care about saving her? Madness and stupidity. Again, I do care about storytelling in video games, both explicit as well as through the visuals, the environments and of course the gameplay. And I'm very skeptical and critical about arbitrary inclusions for the sake of certain modern sensibilities at the cost of artistic integrity. And I don't want to downplay the examples where games have been actually worsened or outright ruined by this stuff. But I also don't want to look for things to hate in a game. And especially with this game, I don't even have a horse in the race. I didn't get too much into all the stuff leading up to the release, and to be honest, until very recently I didn't even know that this game existed. I'm not constantly looking for the next Tolkien-esque fantasy action RPG, so I more or less ignored the whole thing. I liked the artwork I saw, and since it was going to be part of Microsoft's Game Pass, I decided to casually check it out when it released. And so I did. So I expected another open-world action RPG in the style of Bethesda games, and while this game certainly is another first-person RPG in an open world, and there certainly is some Bethesda DNA buried somewhere in the design, to me it's actually closer to Dark Messiah of Might and Magic than Elder Scrolls, or Obsidian's own Bethesda-likes New Vegas and Outer Worlds. Now, when I say this, don't expect a combat and killing simulator on the same level as Dark Messiah. You won't freeze the floor and have enemies slip on the ice, sliding into traps, and you won't crush them under heavy objects. But there are ways to use the environment against your foes. Shoot down exploding plant thingies or use traps you find standing around in dungeons. Look for different ways to approach the enemy and gain an advantage. Combat focuses a lot on movement and positioning. Get to higher positions and pick off enemies with ranged weapons, but be careful because they do this as well. Lead enemies towards each other to fully take advantage of your chain lightning, rely on your shield to block incoming attacks, or be more agile and dodge out of the way. The enemies' animations are elaborate enough and there's additional little visual effects to make this easy enough to do. This game doesn't become Dark Souls, where the enemy tricks you into defending at the wrong time, it just suffices to stay observant. So far, enemies have shown some good combat behavior, at least for this style of game. Less intelligent creatures either charge and maul you, or, if they're able, spit and shoot at you from afar. So it's pretty standard for them. But the more intelligent creatures, they frequently use special attacks, they dodge out of the way and try to gain distance, archers frequently gang up on you. It never gets too complicated, don't get me wrong, here we are again with this game not being a combat simulator. But the fights are very dynamic and I do enjoy them. It's certainly more engaging than in the aforementioned Bethesda-likes. A big part of this is the stamina meter you need to manage, which quickly drains with every attack, every dodge and every successful block, but also quickly replenishes, so it leads to a satisfying push and pull rhythm. The other big part is your combat arsenal. You have a good selection of different weapons, all with their own stats, well duh, animations, combo chains, charge up attacks and finishing blows. There is some overlap between some weapons, but there's still a good variety and lots of versatility with the different weapons. We have the standard with some weaker but faster weapons, and on the other end of the spectrum, slower but stronger weapons. But they also differ with their block and parry timings, time to charge up their heavy attack, and the poise break they inflict to trigger a finishing blow. And hey, it's fun to try out all the finishers. There's also a few ranged weapons that work in a similar way. Wands are the quickest and can build up somewhat of a combo, while pistols and rifles need a lot of time to reload and are only single attack weapons, same as the bow. But you can aim for weak points, to inflict critical damage with them. I guess you can do this with melee weapons as well, but it's far more reliable with ranged weapons. I also really like the way magic is handled in this game, and this makes choosing between one- and two-handed weapons more impactful. For example, both pistols and rifles take ages to reload, but the pistol holds only a single bullet, while rifles hold a few. But with a pistol, you can also carry a spellbook, and you need those to cast magic. Whenever you hold a spellbook in your hand, you lose the ability to block. Instead, you raise the book and are able to cast any spell from it that you understand. By that I mean that there are spell levels and you need to put points into spell mastery to read and cast higher level ones. But yeah, you don't actually have to learn and memorize spells yourself to cast them, you just need the corresponding spellbook. It certainly helps to learn spells, because then you can also unlock additional effects, and here again the magic system shines, because if you cast a spell you have memorized from a book, you get to use a higher ranked version of that spell. Spells also come with different effects, both to enemies as well as to the environment. Fire can inflict a burning state, and when you defeat a burning enemy they turn to ash. Ice can freeze enemies, and it's so satisfying to shatter them afterwards. You can even freeze bodies of water to help with the platforming, though that's pretty much the extent of that. I tried to set fire to the environment, but aside from the odd puddle of oil, this won't work. This isn't Breath of the Wild, where fire can spread through tall grass and the like. I've heard that water in the game conducts electricity, but I never saw it, and I tried it quite often. There was one point in a dungeon where you had to stay out of a puddle that a generator has dropped into, but that was more of a static hazard than some display of physics doing their thing. Still, combat so far has been fun, and when you fight a boss or have more durable enemies accompanied by a bunch of ranged and melee fighters, you have to stay on the move, make full use of your abilities and also command your party members. They bring their own abilities, though, again, there is some overlap with yours. And you can either use your hotkeys to issue a command or open the ability wheel. All abilities have their own cooldown, and yours also consume mana in addition. You can create some good character combos by issuing commands strategically, though if you don't manage your companions, they use their abilities at their own discretion. Another thing that keeps the battles fresh and dynamic is the way equipment is handled in the game. You have your basic weapon and body armor, which for the most part just comes with a set of stats: attack, defense, stamina cost and so on. Footwear and gloves, and of course your accessories, though, don't provide stat boosts, but offer a bunch of different effects. And from the start of the game, those effects more often than not directly affect the gameplay. Things like greater dodge distance, which can throw off your positioning. Health restoration on any kill, which encourages going for the fodder enemies when low on health, or keep them around to have an easy healing method. Increased attack or movement speed. Elemental damage added to a full combo, so you need to time your attacks to pull that one off, to maximize the effect. Or health regeneration whenever you're in water, so you try to lead enemies near water to have an advantage over them. There are of course a lot of equipment pieces with your standard bonuses. 1 point to a stat here, 1% higher crit chance there, and I mean, they're fine as they are. Sometimes you just want a bit more strength or defense. But those more involved effects are handed out quite regularly and early on, and it's a lot more fun to experiment with them than with the more mundane items. Another thing about the items and equipment that I like is that there isn't that much of it in the game. I mean, there are quite a few crafting components and cooking ingredients, and I already did mention the weapon variety, so how can I praise the lack of items? Why even would I praise the lack of items in an RPG? You see, I despise looter shooters. I greatly dislike swapping out pieces of equipment every few minutes just to gain an ever so slight benefit from it. I hate the concept of weapon levels on top of weapon tiers, like a rusty level 50 garbage rifle doing more damage than my level 1 rocket launcher. And this game avoids this crap. Different weapon types all have their base stats and can be upgraded at your camp to have higher quality tiers. So a common sword is weaker than a fine or expert level sword, but you won't ever find a weak level 1 expert sword or a strong level 100 common sword. The same goes for armor. There are different types of armor with their unique benefits and drawbacks, and with that, different usefulness to any given playstyle. You won't really get into a situation where you would throw away a piece of armor you've already upgraded because you found a slightly better version of it. Well, I guess there are enchanted and unique items with special effects that might replace their normal counterpart, but those aren't handed to you left and right, so they feel like substantial power-ups. And speaking of substantial power-ups, upgrading your equipment gives a significant boost, so it's actually rewarding to interact with the system. Some people may find it too simplistic, and that might very well be actually the case. But I just prefer each of my individual items to have more value and to be longer useful than getting showered in a bunch of slightly different items. Sometimes you get the chance to sneak up on unsuspecting enemies, and then you can perform a sneak attack to deal massive damage and, most of the time, kill any regular enemy on your level. The more durable enemies, like bears for example, might need 1 or 2 more hits afterwards to finish them off, but that's it for the most part. The sneaking itself is rudimentary. When you're getting close to an enemy, they begin to notice you, as indicated by a small arrow. And they do so sooner and faster if you're within their field of view. By crouching, you can slow down their detection, though if they're broadly looking your way, they will still spot you rather quickly, and sometimes leaving line of sight isn't enough to hide from them. It's a bit weird, even if you can't see them anymore, their detection might still rise, and there's always somewhat of a global alarm going on, so if one enemy spotted you, all of them are immediately onto you. So yeah, sneaking is not the most reliable, though, and I guess we have Far Cry to thank for that, you can always dive into tall grass and you're effectively invisible, so long as you aren't engaged in combat, that is. Sneak attacks only work from behind though, so be aware of that. No cool assassination moves from hiding spots. You also have to use the specifically designed sneak attack ability. Using your bow on an unsuspecting foe doesn't give you any advantage. I mean, other than landing the first hit. If you're even allowed to ambush an enemy. When I encountered those grave robbers and was fairly sure they were evil dudes, I tried to ambush them, but my attacks weren't even recognized. Well, I thought, maybe you're not allowed to attack non-hostile NPCs. So I walked up to them, a conversation triggered that led to a fight because they were evil dudes, you know? Yeah, stuff like this sucks. And there's a lot more, but let's get back for a moment to the things that don't suck. I really like the level design in this game. Dungeons and other more deliberate areas, let's call them levels for the sake of simplicity, are designed around platforming and verticality, with a lot of interconnected paths and rooms with multiple entrances, so you have in most cases 2 or more different approaches to any combat encounter. Different vantage points to take advantage of, depending on your preferred playstyle. But mostly this design is used to hide bigger and smaller goodies, so dungeon crawling becomes this fun exploration and treasure hunt, where you search through all the nooks and crannies, notice some treasure just out of reach and have to find creative solutions to get to it. Sometimes it's a hole you can crawl through or an underwater tunnel, sometimes you need to climb higher and drop down a hole in the roof. Often there is some breakable object in the way. Some of them can just be destroyed with a weapon strike, but then there are things like weak walls that need to be shattered with either a slam or charge ability, or by shooting exploding barrels near it. Or the spiderwebs and vines you need to burn with either a fire spell or comparable ability, or by shooting these flammable plants that are growing in most of those places for some reason. Yeah, in many instances it seems that the game wants to prevent you from not solving the puzzle. What, you don't have a spellbook with you and no companion with a fire ability? Well, through a crack in the wall you can see the explodey fruit, so just shoot that. Oh, you don't have a ranged weapon with you? Well, that's not a problem. Here, we just placed a bunch of weapons you might need near the puzzle. On the one hand, it's nice that the game provides you with all the tools you need for the job. On the other, it kinda takes out all the adventuring. No need for preparing anything. Just look around until you find everything you need just lying around. But at other times, there are some neat, not hard, but fun puzzle solutions, where you have to move around the room or building you want to enter and shoot an exploding barrel on the inside through the window or something. Or use lightning on a generator to open a door. The game could have gone a lot further, but it's still a fun approach to hidden treasures in an RPG. You mostly see stuff like this in a straight up action adventure, so I appreciate the inclusion. But the most fun puzzles are those tied to the platforming. Finding your way up or spotting an entrance point out of reach and find a makeshift route to it. Once I needed to create an ice floe to reach a small island, and that was neat, and this has me thinking how magic could be used even more for stuff like that. Like burn some ropes to have something drop down and help with the platforming, or maybe shoot switches in the environment. Or have an earth spell that raises platforms out of the ground. But I guess this stuff is not used in dungeons since you can't easily access your storage from there and equip the correct tools. Then again, since the game drops the weapons you need left and right already, why not drop a spellbook near a lake you need to freeze and stuff like that? But yeah, there's stuff left and right to discover within dungeons. The game really rewards you for being observant. That said, most of the game is still an open world with wide, flat areas that don't always work that well with the platforming. Especially natural structures like rocks just don't let you climb up and might even have you glitch out. This is less enjoyable. It's just running around the wilderness, picking up berries here and there and fighting small groups of enemies. It works, but it doesn't stand out from all the other open world games, and it's certainly not the game's strong point. Oh, it certainly looks pretty nice, but that's pretty much all it has to offer. Well, in fact, the whole art design of the game is incredible. They created a really beautiful world, some nice architecture, some neat creature designs, even though the animations of pretty much all the critters are really choppy. And just look at whatever is going on your character's face. But what really stands out is the design of everything nature in this game, especially the mushrooms. Oh man, this game loves its fungi. They're everywhere, on trees, on walls, on the floor, they glow in the dark, and it's not the standard fairy tale Smurf mushrooms, but the more realistic and eerie fungi. And it doesn't only look really good, it also really distinguishes itself from other games by that. Well, maybe not from Last of Us. This here is fantasy Last of Us. Even more so with the main plot about a plague turning all living things into rotten, crazy and violent, mushroom-covered monsters. But man, some of those places just look stunning. Say of the game what you will, hate it, find it boring, but the art design is absolutely amazing. And it makes traversing the otherwise pretty uninteresting open world less of a chore. Yeah, the more structured levels or isolated platforming and exploration challenges are a lot more interesting than the open world. I personally would have preferred a game more focusing on the actual levels and forgo an open world. Maybe only give me a hub where I pick up quests and upgrade my equipment and all that, and transport me to the levels through the world map or something. Then we also wouldn't need the superfluous party camp. Yeah, we can cook there and upgrade our equipment and strengthen our enchantments, and we can also talk to our party members, but we don't really need a camp for that. It feels like the camp is just there, because traditionally CRPGs have had a party camp. The camp is always located on set campsites within the open world, that you first need to discover. You then can activate a big crystal at a campsite to set up camp, or just fast travel to it and immediately enter the party camp. You can even travel back to the exact location where you fast traveled from. And you can't fast travel in dungeons and the like, so there your camp is inaccessible. So you already can only use the camp when you are outside of a dungeon, but then you can abuse it to no end. Let's just imagine there was no open world. All your shopping, upgrading and party bonding would be done in a central hub city, from where you venture into the actual levels through fast travel. You would lose nothing from that system. It would even be more dynamic because you wouldn't just have everything neatly set up in a small circle. Weapon upgrading could be done at the blacksmith, enchanting at the magic workshop, cooking at the tavern. Your party members could be at their favorite spots all over town. Sure, a lot of people see an open, interconnected world as more immersive or richer than a map screen. But I never felt that Dragon Age Origins was a lesser game because of it. And to be honest, stumbling over the scary spider cave a handful of meters to the side of the path you travel isn't really that exciting. The resources freed up by scrapping the open world could be used for more complex levels. You could even hide these side areas inside the levels. Why shouldn't the spider cave be somewhere within the cursed forest the main quest takes you through? Again, the more structured levels are really well designed and a ton of fun to traverse, much more so than the bog standard open world. I don't need to explore this world, it's just not interesting enough for me to really care. I don't care about the monster camp so close to the city. I don't care about the bandit camp a stone's throw away from it. I'm not even sure the developers cared that much about it. The world building, well, the writing in general is just really weak. As far as I understand, this game takes place in the Pillars of Eternity universe. Now, I'm not familiar with the lore, I'm not familiar with anything from Pillars of Eternity actually. I know the two games have been received really well, I've heard a lot of good about them and they appear to be some of the better CRPGs. So I don't know what happened with this one. The introduction is just vague and tells you nothing. Oh, this is a fantasy world where the gods actually exist and some are good and some are not. You are like an avatar of a god and some people think that's swell and some do not. And now you're off to fulfill your destiny, or something. Great. Your actual mission to kick off the plot is a bit better. There is a dangerous mystical plague infecting everything on this really valuable island and you are sent to investigate. This could have been a more linear, deliberately presented story, with a bit of freedom but a set progression. Maybe some dialogue choices here and there to change minor details or single encounters on the preset path. Yeah, that doesn't sound too much like an RPG, but guess what? That's exactly what the game already does. It just pretends to be a big ol' RPG, but nothing you do has any impact on anything. Oh yeah, your godlike abilities depend on the choices you make. That's what the game says, but from what I've seen, it's more like you either accept an ability or you refuse and get a free ability point as a consolation prize, which, to be fair, isn't bad in principle. I mean, it still means a bit of character customization, but it's still less of a choice than, for example, killing or sparing the little sisters in BioShock, which offered a similar trade-off when it came to your rewards, just with more of a story impact. Maybe later the game lets you choose between different abilities, that would be neat. Don't get me wrong, there are choices to make. The game just tries its hardest so that they don't affect anything in the story or the world. Free the prisoner in the tutorial or let her rot in her cell? It doesn't matter. She only accompanies you for a few minutes and as soon as you reach the main portion of the game, she's gone. Awaken this soul-trapping golem as a vessel for one deity or another. Doesn't matter because for now, it can't do anything and needs to grow slowly as the game says. But hey, you might get an ending slide out of it. You see, no matter what you do, what you choose, nothing really changes. Nothing deviates too far from the set out route. And a lot of times the game doesn't even try to hide it. Or the writers were too incompetent to do so. Conversations in this game are a joke. Oh, you have a bunch of responses, some of them even reliant on your attributes like intelligence, resolve or strength and so on. Some are even tied to your chosen backstory. But they don't matter. Often enough they are less interesting than the standard responses when it comes to their effect. Well, let's take a look at how conversations go in this game. Let's observe the differences depending on the responses.
And yet you rallied your spirits and reported for duty. Your dedication is admirable. But we'll return to the topic of your untimely demise shortly. Our first order of business is your purpose here in the Living Lands. Captain Cynric said you have a missive for me from the Emperor. Very good. I'm eager to see what our Emperor intends. Now, His Majesty names you a loyal servant of the Adiran Empire. Homesick already? After what you've been through, I can't say I blame you. But there's work to be done on the frontier. Good work, and I need you here at my side. Our first order of business is your purpose here in the Living Lands. Captain Cynric said you have a missive for me from the Emperor. Very good. I'm eager to see what our Emperor intends. Now, His Majesty names you a loyal servant of the Adiran Empire. Maybe that's all it is, but I'm not leaving anything to chance. This embassy has no shortage of political foes, but the Dream Scourge is what keeps me up at night. You've seen firsthand what it can do in nature. We can't let it reach the cities. Trust me, we'll get to that. This embassy has no shortage of political foes, but the Dream Scourge is what keeps me up at night. Thank you, Envoy. The island is in capable hands. Inquisitor Ludwig thinks the plague is a distraction. She's more concerned about these local rebels fighting against the Empire. Inquisitor Ludwig thinks the plague is a distraction. She's more concerned about these local rebels fighting against the Empire.
Paradisans will knife you in the back over a dirty look.
At least we don't go mad and slaughter each other. The day I came, I noticed the guards talking gibberish. Then the killing started. They went wild. Stabbed their mates in their sleep. I'm trying. Your friend's the one picking a fight with me.
Paradisans will knife you in the back over a dirty look.
At least we don't go mad and slaughter each other. You really have no idea what happened to this place, do you? The day I came, I noticed the guards talking gibberish. Then the killing started. They went wild. Stabbed their mates in their sleep.
Pathetic, isn't it? In a good CRPG, a conversation tree might look like this. Now, I understand that you can't have too many fundamentally different outcomes, but at least give me a few. In this game here, it would look more like this. The end result of a conversation is always the same. God, when I think of the impactful decisions I was able to make in Dragon Age Origins. Now, I was also a bit disappointed with a lot of the empty choices in Baldur's Gate 3. But there were big choices in the game all the time. It's just that there was so much to do that there had to be a lot of dots in between. And even in those instances, the tree would still look better than in Avowed. Your responses at most trigger a little flavor line and then it's back to the script. You can choose wildly different responses and they all lead to the same outcome. Here, I tell the government official that it might very well be my fault that the plague is spreading. And I don't even get a flavor line. NPCs are never allowed to go off script. You can't ever influence them too much. No matter what you say, they're at most slightly amused, because there would be way too much effort in writing situations where important NPCs become hostile or unwilling to help you further. Why even give you so many useless choices? Why even let you choose anything in many of the conversations? Why waste time and money on spoken flavor lines that don't change a thing? Just give me a well-acted, mostly linear story with a bit of flavor depending on a handful of noteworthy decisions, and use the time and money for better voice direction so that the actors read their lines correctly and not like this.
I ran into some trouble exploring a temple north of the city. Bears and traps and guards. What else?
And maybe, if the writers don't need to write so many pointless side stories and conversations, they could improve the overall quality. Then not every character needs to be the sarcastic, quick-witted jokester. And the sooner we stop with the Joss Whedon wannabe writing style, the better. I don't need more guards making jokes when I tell them that my whole crew died and I had to slaughter our own troops who went mad.
Kidding, kidding.
And I don't need nods to modern bullshit about corps not being trained to de-escalate conflicts in my fantasy stories. It doesn't even make sense. These are town guards. Most of their job consists of breaking up pub brawls and mediating between the townspeople. They need to de-escalate all the time. But it's not just the dialogue. The game goes on about refugees driven into a shanty town, and then there's money lying around in the open just for you to take. As if there's a hive of giant spiders inside the city, and not in an abandoned part or something. No, right behind the embassy. There's this one dead guard on the floor, but there should be way more. Either the guards should be actively trying to contain the threat or barricading because they're not able to do so. But it seems nobody cares about it. Nobody even notices. You know, with the giant spider webs behind the embassy. The whole world is static. Everything is just background decoration for when you waltz through, and please don't look too closely. NPCs are just standing in place, never moving away. Well, sometimes there are NPCs who walk back and forth on a fixed route, and even then the game isn't able to not fuck up. You'll encounter two NPCs facing each other and talking for a minute before staring at each other for all eternity, all the time. This world isn't alive. It's filled with barely functioning robots. Calling it the Living Lands is kinda ironic. What's sad is that there are a handful of examples of good writing, few and far between, but they do exist. So there had to be at least some competent people involved in the story. The little bit of good stuff just gets drowned out by all the awful shit. In one camp conversation, one of my party members had a pretty natural reaction and response to me poking a sensitive personal issue. One time I was able to remove a potential combatant before the fight started by persuading him to just walk away. In another instance, I saved a healing potion because I was able to use my healing ability in dialogue to help an NPC. And a side quest about another god's avatar, of a god who seemed to have played a larger role in the Pillars of Eternity games it seems. Again, I'm not all too familiar with those. Well, he tries to atone for his god's sins by giving him a new body and a conscience by merging his essence with human souls. Some unfortunate explorers he murdered. Now, the whole idea is pretty interesting and I enjoyed this little side story, but at the end, the weak dialogue system, or dialogue writing or whatever is the core issue, drags it down. You have a whole bunch of responses, but it all boils down to only two choices. Help the dude, which ultimately leads to his death and nothing else happens, or refuse to help the dude, which forces you to fight him, which leads to his death and nothing else happens. Where was the option to debate him, to persuade him to find another solution? Maybe find willing participants in his soul transfer. You know, instead of murdering people. As a god like yourself, you constantly have visions of a mysterious deity and hear voices. And in a better story, there might have been some intrigue, because there is some cause to assume that this deity might actually be the cause of the plague. There are certainly a lot of mushrooms in the Living Lands, and they are also sprouting from the infected, among other markings, and your possible markings have some similarity to those. Maybe that will be the big twist, or maybe not. I don't really care either way. Maybe the deity is infected with something causing all this because it calls the plague a sickness and tries to heal it, and it grants you the power of healing if you promise to help it, and then it purifies the cursed forest. But if you refuse to help the deity, it still purifies the forest. Maybe the game doesn't want to be a true RPG. Well, then maybe don't force all those half-baked RPG mechanics on me. The dungeon crawling is really fun, both during combat with all the different maneuvers, as well as during exploration, where you really have to keep your eyes open. And the environments are gorgeous. But the writing is just so superficial and weak, the characters artificial, and the story not deep or even good enough to keep me interesting and wanting to explore everything this world has to offer. It might be enough for a mission-based game, where you have the story scenes at the end of an enjoyable level, but not for a game that wants you to explore far and wide, talk to random NPCs and all that. I don't think I will stick with this game for much longer. It might surprise me, who knows, but I won't hold my breath for that. That's it from Rady. I wish you an absolutely amazing day, and I hope to see you again on the next game.